Here's a question nobody in this show wants to answer out loud. What if the mole everybody is hunting for doesn't exist? Not because nobody betrayed Joe McNamara, but because the betrayal isn't coming from one person. It's coming from a system. Episode 3 of Lioness Season 3 is called The Bear is Infected. And on paper, it sounds like a mole hunt. Somebody leaked. Somebody talks. Find them. Done. That's the show we think we're watching. That is not the show we get. What we actually get is Taylor Sheridan quietly building the scariest argument of the season. That the real threat to a superpower isn't a spy in the building. It's the idea that spies don't even need to be inside the building anymore. They just need Americans willing to make one bad decision at the right moment. Stick with me, because by the end of this video, the interrogation scene, the chain to a bed flash forward, and that bear metaphor everyone's quoting are going to mean something very different than they did when the credits rolled. Let's start where the episode starts. Not with spies. With a family falling apart. Joe's house got hit. Her kids know something's wrong now. And Kate, her daughter, does the only rational thing a teenager in that position can do. She asks her mother to quit. If you strip away the espionage plot for 1 second, this is just a kid asking a parent to choose them over a dangerous job. Completely reasonable request. Any of us would want that from a parent. But here's where the show earns its intelligence. Joe doesn't argue that the job matters more than her family. She argues something colder. Quitting doesn't undo anything. The people who found her still know who she is. The operation that exposed her is still running. Walking away doesn't put the genie back in the bottle. It just hands the problem to somebody who understands it less than she does. This is containment logic, not patriotism. It's the same logic you'd use if you found out your house had a gas leak. You don't move out and pretend the leak isn't your problem anymore. You stay and you fix it because the leak doesn't care whose name is on the lease. And that's why the small moment of Joe putting a weapon into her son Neil's bag actually lands so hard. It's not a big dramatic scene. No slow motion, no swelling music needed. It's just quiet acceptance that the war already moved in. The house isn't a shelter from the job anymore. The house is now part of the operation. Keep that idea in your head. Boundaries collapsing. Because that's not just a family theme this episode. It's the entire theme. Now to the scene everyone's talking about. Alexandra Balakin, under pressure, in a room designed to break her. Quick context if you're just catching up on the character. Alexandra is a Ukrainian operative who's been working deep inside Russian intelligence, which, on its own, should make her an ally. But Joe's house gets attacked right after an earlier operation involving a target named Yeremov. Suddenly the timing looks less like coincidence and more like a signal. So Kyle and the team do what intelligence teams do when timing looks suspicious. They stop trusting the timeline and start pressuring the person. And they go hard. Family used as leverage, psychological pressure stacked on top of psychological pressure. It's uncomfortable to watch, and it's meant to be, because the show wants you asking the same question Alexandra eventually forces onto the room. If this is what our side does to a woman who might be innocent, how different are we really from the network we're supposedly fighting? But Alexandra doesn't crack the way the room expects. She flips the entire premise of the interrogation. She tells them they're solving the wrong problem. They're hunting for one traitor. The actual issue is that the system itself has been slowly, quietly rotting for years. That single reframe is the hinge the whole episode swings on. This stops being a whodidit story. It becomes a how deep does it go story. Those are very different mysteries, and the second one is much harder to solve because there's no satisfying arrest at the end of it. Now let's talk about the metaphor that gives the episode its title, because it's doing more work than a cool visual. America is the bear. Russia is framed as the wolf pack. China gets framed as the tiger. Neither predator can take the bear head-on and win. A wolf pack that attacks a bear directly gets mauled. A tiger that tries the same thing gets the same result. So the only strategy that actually works against something that big and that strong is disease. You don't defeat the bear. You infect it, and you let the infection do the work over years, not days. Here's why this isn't just clever writing. This is a real framework, and it has a name in the actual world of geopolitics. It's often called gray zone conflict or hybrid warfare. The entire concept is built on avoiding a fight you can't win conventionally. and instead applying pressure through disinformation, economic leverage, corruption, and compromised individuals slowly, patiently, without ever crossing the line into open war. And this isn't science fiction the writers invented for drama. The real world has receipts. In 2010, the FBI dismantled a network of 10 Russian intelligence officers who had been living in the United States for years under fake American identities. Married, employed, raising kids, going to 4th of July barbecues with their actual neighbors. That case became public knowledge, and it later inspired the show The Americans. One of those illegals had a Harvard graduate degree and was reportedly using it specifically to get close to people who might one day sit near real power. None of them needed to steal a single document to be valuable, just needed to be positioned. Then there's Robert Hansen, an FBI counterintelligence agent who spied for Moscow for over 20 years before he was caught. Because he understood exactly how counterintelligence worked, he knew precisely how to avoid detection. The man hunting moles was one. And blackmail specifically, the thing Alexandra describes in this episode, isn't a plot device either. Intelligence researchers point to romantic entanglement and compromising situations as one of the most consistent ways ordinary people get turned into assets, not ideology. Not money even. Leverage. A secret someone doesn't want exposed becomes a lever someone else can pull whenever they want something. So, when the show has Alexandra say the compromised network reaches from regular citizens all the way up into government, that's not exaggerated for drama. That's a fictionalized version of a documented playbook. This is probably the most underrated idea buried in the episode, so let's slow down here. Caitlin's conversation about China matters more than it looks like on first watch, because it draws a distinction most spy shows never bother making. Russia, in this world, still leans on classic tools. Human assets, blackmail, old-school tradecraft. China, meanwhile, gets framed as playing an entirely different game. Economic leverage, information, technology, slow social division instead of a single dramatic betrayal. Different tools, same targets, same goal. Not necessarily to destroy the country from outside. The scarier goal is getting a country to lose trust in itself from the inside. A population that stops believing its own institutions, stops believing its neighbors, stops believing the information in front of it, doesn't need to be invaded. It just needs to be left alone to finish the job on itself. That's genuinely the most unsettling read of the title. The bear isn't dying from a gunshot wound. It's dying from something already circulating in its bloodstream. Something that was there long before anyone noticed symptoms. And that's exactly why a mole hunt in this story was never going to be enough. You can arrest one person. You cannot arrest an entire slow erosion of trust that S.O. hears where Joe makes her move, and it's genuinely a smart one on paper. She pushes for the government to publicly announce they've captured a Russian intelligence officer. The logic is sound. If Moscow believes one of their people has flipped or been compromised, they have to react. Contact patterns change. Assets get moved. People panic and make mistakes. Mistakes are what intelligence agencies live for, because mistakes are visible. There's also a second layer here that's easy to miss. The announcement gives cover to protect Alexandra's real position. The public can be told America caught a Russian officer, without ever revealing that the actual source feeding them information is a Ukrainian operative embedded inside Russian intelligence. On the surface, it's a clean, elegant play. Bait the network, protect the asset, force the enemy to expose itself. Except, the episode ends by cutting straight to Joe, restrained, imprisoned, water dripping on her forehead while that exact announcement plays on a loop in front of her. Which raises a question this show absolutely wants you sitting with. If the enemy was genuinely caught off guard by that announcement, capturing Joe afterward is an extraordinary, near-impossible operation to pull off that cleanly and that fast. But if they weren't caught off guard, if they already knew the announcement was coming before the public did, then somebody inside Joe's own operation had visibility into her plan before it happened. That's a very different kind of mole problem. Not someone who leaked a name. Someone or something that had a window into decisions before they were made. Here's the theory I actually think holds up best. Forget asking who the mole is. Ask a scarier question. How much of Joe's operation was already visible to the other side before any of this started? If Russian intelligence already understood her team's patterns, her identity, her instincts well enough to predict how she'd react to a threat. Then removing one compromised person changes nothing. You pull one thread, another one's already in place. That's not a leak. That's a system with a structural weakness. And Joe's entire counterattack may have just confirmed to the enemy exactly how she hunts. There's also a darker possibility worth sitting with. Maybe Joe herself isn't collateral damage in a bigger operation. Maybe she's the actual target, specifically because she's one of the only people sharp enough to trace how deep this network actually runs. You don't need to turn someone like that. You don't necessarily even need to kill her. You extract what she knows, and you neutralize the one person capable of mapping the whole thing. If that's the real shape of Season 3, then this was never simply America versus Russia. It's a contest over who understands the battlefield better, because whoever holds more information effectively holds the entire game. And right now, Joe knows enough to be dangerous to the network, but not enough to see all of it. That gap is exactly where the tension for the rest of this season is going to live. Here's where the bear is infected actually leaves us. Not with an answer, with a diagnosis. America, in this story, isn't facing an invasion. It's facing an infection that's been spreading quietly for years, and the people carrying it might not even know they're carriers. Joe just tried to force that infection into the open. The final shot of this episode strongly suggests it may have found her first. If you think you've already spotted who's really compromised in this show, drop your theory in the comments. I want to see how many of you land somewhere different than I did. And if this kind of breakdown is useful to you, subscribe, because episode 4 is going to test every theory we just built. I'll see you in the next one.